This isn't Troy's apartment. Sorry. I'm not a burglar. I have this teleporting thing, and I always just end up in this apartment.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
My cousin had a teleporting problem. It tore the family apart.
I'm sorry to bother you.
Wait. Here, take my robe. I don't want you to catch a chill.
Oh, I just live down the hall. I'll bring it back.
Oh, keep it. I have 6 more just like it.
She does.
Did you pee or did you teleport? Teleported. Troy moved out. There's just these random people there.
Welcome to the Critique of the Week, 1 Week Critiques interview series where we discuss the development of an individual piece of literature with its author. I am al-Sirgany, and I'm here today with Darin Quan. Director Darin Quan specializes in conceiving and executing cinematic productions for brands and organizations with a story to tell. His works include projects for Time Inc., Under Armour, Chase, Toyota, Google, HP, and Vox. His work and narrative includes the series The Adulterers, an official selection of the 2018 Sundance Film Festival. As a cinematographer, his feature work includes Diverge, 2016 Tallgrass Film Festival's Best Cinematography, What Children Do, Grand Prize at the 2017 Ridgewood International Film Festival, and Empathy, Inc., all of which are available on Amazon and iTunes. Welcome, Darin.
All right. Thanks for having me, Adam.
Yeah, you should know in particular, you haven't met our editor, Matthew Schmidt, but he's super jealous that you worked on Empathy, Inc., because Mark Leitner, who wrote the film, was a teacher of his.
Oh, wow.
And his favorite poet.
No way. Oh, man. I would love to talk to him about Mark. And it was really fun working with him.
Yeah, he was wondering if you'd work together, but for the sake of the interview, we may hit that interpersonal stuff a little bit later.
Yeah.
So Darin, I've come to think of you as a director, 1 part Samuel Beckett, 1 part Nick Hornby, and 3 parts Tina Fey. You're full of comedy, particularly observant humor, and the absolute absurd. Which I think is going to be best contextualized for our audience if we take a look at some of what you've done. I'm hoping you can read us just a little bit of the original draft of your piece, The Hospitality of Neighbors, which was then called Teleporting at its beginning.
Yeah, sure. So just like the first page.
Yeah.
Interior, Harry's apartment, night. Harry is making himself some tea. He's talking with someone who is off camera. Harry, I don't think Abbey Road is their best album. It has the whole seamless song progression thing, but in terms of the most unique album, I think Yellow Submarine has a more eclectic mixture of songs. Troy, what are you talking about? Harry, Yellow Submarine? Troy, what's that? Harry, the Beatles? Troy, who? Harry, don't tell me you haven't heard of the Beatles. Troy, I mean, they're a band, obviously, right? Harry, I wonder sometimes why I even try to have a conversation with you. The camera reveals that Troy is a can of coffee. Interior, hallway, night. The hallway is dark. A blue light flashes from another room. Interior, living room, night. Harry is sitting on the floor in his underwear. Harry, where am I? Ron comes in, also wearing underwear. Natalie is right behind him, wearing a nightgown. Ron, what the fuck? Natalie, what was that? Harry looks around, confused. Harry, Natalie, oh my God. Ron shields Natalie. Ron, who the hell are you? How did you get in here? Harry, my name's Harry. I don't know. Ron, Mister, you better get the hell out of our place right now. To Natalie, call 911. Harry, I don't mean you any harm. Ron, like hell you do. Ron grabs a broom and starts poking the air in front of Harry, who stands up. Ron pokes at him and gets him up and out of the room. Interior entryway continuous. They're at the door now. Ron is swatting at him with the broom. Natalie, into phone. Yes, a strange man is in our house. No, we don't know him. Harry, I'm leaving. Just stop hitting me. Harry struggles with the door and it opens suddenly. Interior lobby, continuous. The door shuts behind him. Harry stares at the lobby. Harry, what? This is my lobby. He turns and says into the door, I live here. I'm your neighbor in apartment 1A. On, through the door. Get the fuck off my stoop. Interior lobby in front of apartment 1A. Moments later, Harry reaches his door. He bends over and lifts the doormat and grabs the spare key. He opens the door. Interior Harry's apartment. Moments later, Harry comes inside and grabs a robe. He goes to bed and lies down. Up on the ceiling is the ghost of a woman. This is Margaret. Harry, it's happened again. Margaret, God damn it, Harry. Harry, it wasn't my fault. I was just lying down and all of a sudden I was in another apartment. Margaret, we worked so hard to make sure this wouldn't happen again.
All right.
I forgot that was only 4 pages.
Yeah.
But that's how it started. That was the first like germ of the idea. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you actually sent us the 2 versions that we're going to have up on our website, they're notably version 1 and 28. And a lot has changed over the course of those, including the title, the names of the characters, the absence of a conversational coffee can. So I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about how you got from draft 1 to draft 28 and what a draft means to you as you've gone through.
Yeah, I mean, it's a whole journey for me. I feel like I envy writers who have a very clean process where they start with, say, like an outline, and they know the main characters, they know the beats of the story, and writing it is just like a fast thing where they're just plugging in the scenes. I've still have not been able to make myself work that way. I've tried, and who knows, maybe I'll continue to try because it's so much more efficient and clean. But the process of writing for me is really just throwing myself into a bottomless pit. And I don't even know if I'm going to come out of it with a thing. It's really like what we just looked at. Those 4 pages could easily have just remained those 4 pages and never turned into anything. And I have countless other 4-page, 5-page things that I just quickly sketch out, and they never go anywhere because sometimes something just never comes to life, no matter how hard you beat at it. But there are other ideas. I don't have a formula for it, so I don't know which ideas qualify as this that end up becoming something. And this was one of those ideas. So the process of this particular idea for me was, after I write the first like blurb, which was that, I'll just make a new version of it and just continue to think about it and write out whatever I think could happen next. And usually I think I'll look back on that as me just gathering raw material that has no shape, that is not me thinking at all about climaxes or motivations. And I think that's where the absurdist thing comes in, because for me, like, I love silly things, I love absurdist things, and I found that the most effective way for me to write is by using every part of myself. I don't want to deny that just because I think that it's not serious or anything like that. So I give myself broad leeway to start an idea and to attack an idea from any vector. And that includes, like, I will think of an idea purely as like, how many ridiculous things can I, think of to put in here that have nothing at all to do with building the characters or building the world. And other times I'll take another tack and I'll attack a story from the point of view of, oh, this character needs to be much better defined. I need to like really sit down and think about that. So the process of writing is me just kind of juggling all these different points of view on an idea. And whether an idea turns into something is really dependent on whether it survives that process, whether it can survive being kind of poked at from all these different vectors. You know, can you be silly and ridiculous? Can you also have characters that are clear and have some semblance of a motivation? Can you have a structure that feels like it takes you someplace that wasn't just back to where you started? And so me getting to draft 28 is really trying to figure out, can this take all of that scrutiny? And a lot of it is trial and error. A lot of me is thinking that it's done and then taking a week off and then coming back and realizing like, oh man, no, this really needs this or really needs that. And I would say it's also equal parts intuitive and equal parts like analytical. The analytical thing for me is the structure and the characters and the motivation, figuring out, you know, is what this person wants clear? Did they say it out loud? You know, because if they didn't, then you have to really, really know through some other means what it is that they want, what it is that they're struggling with. And then the intuitive thing is, am I bored by this? Am I interested in this? Is this something that I would want to see? You know, disregarding what other people tell you a work of writing should be, you really have to trust your own gut and trust your own feeling about, am I interested in this? Is this fun to me? And that's why I never judge anybody for what they read. Because if you love, like if Michael Crichton is your favorite author, if Dostoevsky is your favorite author, the important thing is, are you enjoying them and are you engaged by them? So it doesn't matter highbrow, lowbrow, wherever it comes from, you know, I have to enjoy it first if I'm going to make it. Because you spend a lot of time with things in film. It's not just the writing, it's the shooting, it's the editing. So I have to be inspired by it. And this ended up being, I think, of all the stuff that I've worked on, this was the most successful for me from that point of view of I was engaged with it through every step along the way. And I was continuing to find new ways of being engaged with it. Even in the editing and writing the music, I found new inspiration in it. So it's a fertile idea for me. And that was a learning point for me, because I think a mistake that I've made with past works is I didn't allow myself to be guided by that. I thought too much about what other people would think and whether or not they would take it seriously, or if I was, you know, just being ridiculous, you know, and play it straight, Darin. And I would say that the film that I did just before this one didn't succeed in that sense, because I really denied myself that fun. I really tried to make something that was really straight. And at the end of it, it just wasn't me. So I really prioritized that with this work, and that really worked. So that was the journey of writing this. And also I feel the journey of writing anything for me, a long, messy process where I kind of put on different hats and just see if it survives. And so it's a bit like Hunger Games for screenwriting.
Right on. I think I'm interested in so many things, and I have a lot of questions coming off of that, including sort of how new absurds enter in, like later on you're going to have a near obsessive tendency to shoot halved grapes. But I think probably the more substantive question is about being you and who you are, and how your sense of your own work is developed. When we first asked you to do this, you'd mentioned that you moved to New York about 10 years ago now, right?
It's a little bit more. In 2006 is when I moved here. So okay. It's been 55 years, if my math is right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And at the time, as I understand it, you hadn't had any real script writing experience, and you sort of built your own directorial and film life here, and as well as a musical life, which is all of what you do now. So I'm wondering also, both of those they're differently performance art forms. A lot of the folks that we chat with do on the page work or differently static work. And I think in my experience, you and I have also talked a little bit about this. As I have with many people, I went through several literary degrees, and I think I only ever was obligated to read maybe one play, which was, I think, Beckett's Endgame,
Oh, wow.
which is a little out there. And what you do is this multifaceted process. There's a production element to it. There's a financial element to being able to do the production element. There's a time investment. There's many people that you're orchestrating. And so I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about both your experience working your way into film, but also how learning to do film has helped you adapt a writing style that suits the particular character of film itself, as opposed to something that's more typically read on the page and that you interact with one-to-one.
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting for me. The process of writing is very much informed by my experience with producing things, to making things, physically creating something. I think it's, like anything, the more you know about the medium itself, like what the raw material looks like, the more you can kind of start to imagine it in your head. It's for me, it's no different than like if you're building a house, knowing the dimensions, and knowing how long it takes to build a house, and knowing about how many guys you're going to need to help you, really like brass tacks questions like that, I find inevitably inform the writing. For me, I think there's another school of thought that says, like, you shouldn't think about that stuff at all when you're writing. You should really be focused on being your most creative self, and production limits be damned, and you'll figure it out later. I don't really think that way. And in fact, I think I've been able to, I feel, be more creative for me, anticipating what makes production hard, and writing in solutions that are creative and actually make production easier. So that's a whole thing, and I'll get to that. But to answer your first question about like how I kind of got into film and my process of coming to New York, coming from California, I knew I needed to make a move. I lived in Northern California. It wasn't LA. There was not a film culture or business to speak of up there. I lived in San Jose at the time. And I knew I wanted to make films. As you said, I am into music as well. I started as a film composer, so that's how I got into film. And one thing I always liked about film is it's a synthesis of all these other disciplines that I was already interested in: photography, writing. I had done like prose writing a lot, music, obviously. All these different disciplines. I always loved working with actors, so it was just like the total package for me. So I knew I wanted to work in film. Decided to move to New York. Fast forward 6 or so months, and I'm, renting a small room in someone's apartment while trying to get temp office work and doing PA jobs, just trying to get closest to a camera as I can. I even handed out my resume to a production manager. When I saw Law and Order filming on the street, I went to Kinko's and printed out my resume and handed it out. Needless to say, that's not how you get a job in film. But I was just so eager, like just looking at a film set. It's similar to when I look at a guitar. It's just, there's something about it that just draws me to it. So at some point I was going to figure out how to make a living at it, but I didn't know how. Then the next milestone for me was I started an online kind of sketch comedy group with 2 actors, and we did stuff for about a year, making original videos. And that was really my film school. That was really where I got, you know, hands-on experience with what it takes to make stuff on a production schedule. And I was doing everything. I was shooting it, directing it, editing, doing the music. And I chose to do that because I was like, this is how I want to make films. I was inspired by people like Steven Soderbergh or Robert Rodriguez, who, you know, are also their own editors. In Rodriguez's case, he also does the music. I knew that's how I wanted to work. And I just decided, you know, no matter what anybody says, I'm going to give myself those jobs and I'm just going to do it again and again and get better at it. And the screenwriting thing for me came after I had really gotten a lot of production experience, both as a PA and doing the sketch comedy stuff. I wasn't writing them initially, the sketches, the two actors were writing them and then we would shoot them. And towards the end of our tenure, I started to write more. Because writing was the thing that I always was a little nervous about. I was always very insecure about my writing. I was always attracted to things that were very abstract and weird and very, to your point, like Samuel Beckett, which people like would scratch their heads at. And I was reluctant to just go like, hey, here's something that I wrote, because I felt much more secure directing other people's stuff or like writing music for people's stuff. Like I would get an immediate reaction from that was positive. Whereas with writing, I would get a lot of confusion and furrowed brows. So I was like, okay, maybe I just need to keep that to myself. But then I started writing stuff and I don't know where it came from, but I gave myself permission to just be ridiculous. And I think a lot of it came from my knowledge of production and how hard it is to find props. I think this is where it started for me, because when you have, and I'll send you the first sketch that I wrote is a sketch called The Name Game. It's about a dinner party between two couples where they just trade names. They go like, my name's Bruce. Would you like it? And then the guy goes, Bruce, I like the sound of that. Sure. My name's Phil. Would you like my name? And then, so I gave myself, I don't know why I think it was because after watching my acting friends writing these ridiculous things, I was like, well, if they're writing this, then maybe I'm not so far off in doing this. And when I was writing that, you know, I was like, oh, they have to be making food because it's a dinner party, you know, what should they be making? And I think it was equal parts laziness and creativity, where I was just like, there's no food. The plates are empty. And so there's a scene where you can hear the sizzle of food, but I cut away to the pan and there's nothing in there. And I remember that was a real aha moment for me in terms of everything finally started to come together, where I realized like, oh, wow, maybe my laziness can be a source of inspiration here, because I didn't want to have to bother with like making a full meal and having continuity of like, oh no, you don't take any bites because we have to make it again then. I was like, what if I just sidestep that? It's already a sketch about people trading names. I mean, why not? And I think everything kind of opened up for me when I gave myself permission to just not care and just to recognize like, hey, it doesn't matter. You know, nobody cares. And I think this goes for a lot of things, where I think we end up, when something becomes very widespread and almost systematized, as film is, certainly, you can go to school to learn it. Yeah. A lot of times people prioritize things as like, this is just how everybody does it, versus whether or not it actually needs to be done that way. And I think any great filmmaker that you can think of, there are inevitably people that just kind of broke those rules. Like Orson Welles dug holes in the ground to get the camera lower. David Lynch is David Lynch. You know, these are great examples of like, the rules don't matter, and film is fake. You know, I've always celebrated the fact that film is fake. You know, these are actors. They're not real people. It's not a documentary. And, you know, if you're going to the point of like hiring someone to be a prop master on a film set, you're already acknowledging that none of this stuff is real. So why not like get in there a little bit and maybe mess with it? And that was really the start of me like learning how to follow that impulse with writing. Now, that's not to say like everything just became easier. In fact, I think I've gone on a big journey since then. And that was in 2009, I think, when I did that sketch. And I really continue to hit creative walls in terms of the technical aspects of writing. I've never taken easily to being a good technical writer. And what I mean by that is having characters that are clear, where people know like, oh, this person wants this thing and they're doing XYZ to get it. And this is the antagonist, or this is the force that they're coming up against. And all the things that make writing, I think, hang together as something that most people can read and kind of experience, as opposed to writing as an intellectual exercise where like, oh, that's interesting that there was no food in the pan and all that. I knew that I didn't want that. I didn't like writing or work that was like that was just kind of frivolous. I felt like I wanted something that had the best of both worlds for me. So I continued to chip away at writing as that. And in the meanwhile, I continued to direct for other people, to make work for brands, for a living, to do music. So all these things are always kind of spinning around. And so which brings us now to more the present. In the last year, I really noticed that I'd not really been making my own work. And I think I had gotten a little bit blocked with that technical thinking that I mentioned, about forcing myself to think technically and to really try to be a better technical writer.
Sure.
And when I took a look at it, I was like, well, what's been the result of that? I haven't made anything of my own really in the last few years. Like I worked with Mark on Empathy, and I DP'd a bunch of films, and I directed the web series that got into Sundance. So I'd been busy, but I hadn't been developing my own thing. And I think in a way that thinking about myself as a technical writer had made me scared of writing all over again. It's the same reason why I didn't write before. Like and this is why, going back to what I said before, you really have to invest in, well, how do you see it? You know, because you can inadvertently get into a trap of thinking too much about, am I doing this the right way? Will other people agree with me? You know, will I win over the critics? You know, however you want to think about it, you could get blocked really easily, as I have been at many times for years. So I decided to really make some new shorts and just focus on producing. So I made The Game, which is the film that I made before this one, Hospitality of Neighbors, and really just focused on making stuff and getting out of my own way. And that experience went well. And then I did Hospitality of Neighbors, and it went even better because I, you know, as I said before, gave myself permission to just be my whole self and not worry too much about even whether it's good or not. I think there's a lot of people that could watch this and go like, this sucks. And I've kind of made peace with that now. You know, I'm okay with it. And I think after spending years being so scared of that reaction, I now realize that's on the other side of that is who you really are as an artist. And you have to cross over that threshold, whether, you know, just naturally or through deliberate effort, in my case, to get there. And now we come to the present where I can't make anything because there's a global pandemic. So,
yeah. So I have two big follow-up questions. One that I'm obliged to ask because Ingrid Wensler, one of our other editors, has watched your Incredible Cat film many times, and she won't let me do this interview if I don't ask you about the binders that Phil likes to walk underneath from time to time, and how they have played into your artistic process in the past or in the present.
Yeah, totally. I mean, those binders are really more sentimental value than any kind of working document. When I was first living in New York, I knew no one. I was very lonely, and the only thing I had was just trying to be creative and trying to make stuff. And to me, that meant, you know, paper and pen. And I think I went through a lot of notebooks, just trying to congeal something into something cohesive. And so a lot of those notebooks are me just kind of trying to free write myself into something substantive, a finished work. In those cases, it was like a prose kind of thing. I was trying to write a short story, which should not have taken me that many pieces of paper, but I was really literally teaching myself how to write. And the way that I often have to learn stuff is I have to consider everything. You know, I'm not someone that if you just show me one way to do it, I'm happy to just do it that way. I really have to like beat it into shape and really explore all these other beaten paths or non-beaten paths sometimes to figure out, well, could that work? You know, what happens if I do this? And so I was doing things like writing the story from the point of view of an ancillary character all over again, making another outline that had nothing to do with the main action of the story, redoing the story with a different motivation, you know, changing the gender of a character. I was really just wandering and really experimenting because I didn't know yet. It's kind of like, you know, if you, not that I have kids, but I imagine if you have kids, you only get a chance to raise them once. So it kind of like time decides for you, this is the way that you raise that kid and you can't go back and redo it. With writing, it's different. You can just go ahead and rewrite it. You can start again from scratch. You can throw it all out. You can rewrite it multiple times. And I've done that with editing. I've done that with music. I've broken things down and redone it, you know, a dozen times. Each time, sometimes being less satisfied than how it was before. And I was really trying to teach myself, like, what's the way that I want to write? What's a way that I can write that I feel it gives me something good, that I can hang my hat on, that I am satisfied with. And I think those notebooks were my early steps towards just figuring out where I stand in terms of a process, in terms of what I was looking for. And I don't think I ever figured it out in those notebooks. That's why they never really turned into anything. I was really trying to ask myself the question, you know, where does writing come from? Writing is not something that I took to naturally, although I've done it a lot throughout my life. I think it's never been something that emerges fully formed very easily for me. It's always been hard labor. And I have tried a lot of ways to kind of get out of the way of whatever kind of flow that I could get. I feel like I'm the furthest in that process now than I have been before. But back then I really was struggling, I think, to figure out, you know, what do I need to do just to make something? And I think part of it also was just generally not knowing anyone in a big city and having a lot of time on my hands. All I could do was just sit with pieces of paper and just, well, let's try to write that again and then see what happens. And because I draw also, some of those papers were filled with me just making a comic book out of it and just going like, well, visually, how could I explore something? And I would read in an interview how such and such person likes to write. And then I would go like, well, let me try that approach. And I was reading a lot of books on writing at the time as well and doing the exercises that those books have. And spoiler alert, none of this stuff worked. You know, that's the thing that's really shocking to me looking back on it all, is it was all just me spinning my wheels. And I think me not giving myself permission to just write in the same way that I just play music or in the same way that I just draw. You know, I think, and I'm not unique in this sense. I think everyone has just a natural creativity that can get interrupted by a lot of things in life. You know, the influence of someone, the expectations of an industry, or even just your own expectations about something. I think if you expect something to be hard, then it's going to be hard. And for writing, for me, I always thought of it as something really difficult and arduous, that it had to be perfect. So I was battling a lot of those insecurities in those notebooks as well. But I still have them, and they're an interesting reminder of, you don't need to go down that road again. You know, you're going to be okay. Just like keep on keeping on.
Yeah, I'm actually really glad I asked about the notebooks. I think that gives me some interesting insight into your own kind of youthful process, but
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
also something I deeply sympathize with. I've got stacks of, I used to write out other people's poems. I've probably got thousands of pages of just like handwritten versions of people's poems, trying to understand them and take them apart, rearrange
Yeah.
them. I think to your other thinking around how coming out of the other side of some of that is discovering your own aesthetic and how to work with it and how to interact with it. Um, I'm interested in a lot of your stylistic and aesthetic choices, not only in terms of sort of how do I get around, right, like continuity and food, uh, but also as someone who's capable of animation and does his own editing, etc., some of the things that you do in a piece like The Hospitality of Neighbors. So one thing that's particularly exemplary of that to me is the choice in your final script, but also in the film itself, which are notably different, uh, to actually physically bring a hand in and put the lens cap on in order to illustrate jumping back in time in order to then move back forward. I'm interested in that particular choice, but also in some of the aesthetic choices that you make and how you think about those, whether cutting grapes in half and like that being an old family recipe is a deep metaphor to you, um, or if that's purely entertainment value for you. Uh, and it's just something that you find funny. If the lens cap is deeply meaningful as an alternative to time lapse in some other way, given that you're teleporting characters, or if that's something that you found is about just this is what I feel like works in this film.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think for me, all of that stuff comes just intuitively, and thankfully so, because after what we've been talking about, just how difficult my experiments with writing have been before, where I tried to get deliberate with it and tried to really get analytical with it and technical with stuff. I think for me, the writing process is fun because I allow myself to go into a state of mind where, it's like free association. And I think the way that I think of writing now is it's kind of like hanging out with a friend, and sharing a joke with a friend. Like if somebody that you know says a joke and you add to that joke, which is something that happens all the time if you're hanging out with a friend, that to me is writing.
Yeah.
That to me is, oh, you have A, I'm going to add B to it. And oh, that was funny. I'm like, oh yeah, then C comes along and adds to B. And that's the same process, but you're just doing it with yourself. And that's how I approach stuff like that. So when I'm in that point of view, it's a playful state of mind. It's a playful, kind of ridiculous, silly place where I'm not trying to be ridiculous. I'm not trying to be anything. But that's the thing, is like you're letting go of that tension and you're just allowing the ideas to come to you. And that's where that stuff comes from for me. I don't think about it in terms of symbology or representing things. I do think that it's very much rooted in, as I've said before, my knowledge of how things are made in film and my experience with the different jobs in film, whether it be editing or composing or directing or shooting. I know how much effort it takes to think of clever transitions that make sense. And I do it in my professional jobs so much sweat equity is put into making good transitions or animating out the right dissolve. And there's a certain freedom, I guess, that comes from going, that doesn't matter, and just throwing it out. And I think, and that's not to say that I am trying to do that, but I do think that if I had to trace the origins of that point of view, that state of mind, I think it's no different than, you know, if you spend 3/4 of your day in an office and you don't see the sun, you're going to think about the sun a lot. You're going to want to be in the sun, and you're going to enjoy the sun a lot more. That's not to say that you are deliberately trying to turn every situation into a sunny room, but it colors your point of view. And so, like any experience you have, it ends up being part of your point of view, and it becomes part of where you write from. And like I said before, I think for me, good writing comes from someone being themselves, regardless of what that looks like, or what pieces come together to create that. And that's another way of saying just being honest. And for me, like I enjoy being ridiculous, and I want writing to me to feel as pleasurable and easy as hanging out with a friend and just sharing a joke. And I think that there's no reason it can't be. So all of that stuff is just me playing. It's just me playing around, and also knowing from experience that that stuff doesn't matter in terms of an audience's reception of a work. Nobody is going to say, well, that's not a movie, if I do stuff like that. In the same way that nobody is going to say, well, that's not a play if in The Tempest there's no actual, you know, ocean at the beginning of the play on the stage. You know, it's all fake. It's all fake. And as soon as you embrace that, you know, film is lagging behind, I think, other works like theater, where or writing, where this kind of thinking of dismantling what the thing is, you know, happened a while ago. I think with film, you still have an audience trained to expect that ocean to be there. They are trained to see things as being hyper real. And you see that in its highest example with superhero movies, which I love. I grew up reading comic books, but all of those explosions have to look crisp and real, and the physics have to be absolutely perfect and believable. And when the Hulk punches somebody, you have to feel his muscles and see that vein right there. So subjectivity doesn't exist in film right now in a way that's acceptable to audiences. And that's me intellectualizing about it, but that's not where I come from when I think about that stuff, but it's how I make myself feel better about it.
No, I feel that. I'm like always irritated when someone takes a drink in film and I can tell the cup angle doesn't actually involve water and no one's gulping, which seems like a dumb thing in narrative work, especially when it's a little over the top in and of itself. But that barrier, that kind of uncanniness is something that no matter how much film I watch and how much I think about how to read it, dogs me a little bit. To some of the other questions around that, you'd mentioned to me before we started this interview that you see film, let me put it this way, I find film to be a particularly interesting medium because it operates temporally, right? Like it has a time factor that other kinds of artistic endeavors don't involve. And that time is containable in a way that stage plays aren't necessarily. It also has a different kind of development in that way, right? Like it's very rare to see all 28 versions of a Raymond Carver story, or although he was someone who kept versions in folders sort of meticulously. You were talking to me a little bit about your own set of versions and how opportunities come throughout, and you described there being 3 stages of a film's development, and I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about those 3 stages and how they work for you.
Yeah, I mean, with film, and many people have said this, that the writing happens 3 times in a film: when you write it, when you shoot it, and then when you edit it. And I've found that to be true, and those also represent 3 opportunities to screw it up, if you're not careful, because I think each stage requires you to focus on separate things. In the writing, to me, that process is about going into that childlike kind of playful state where just you allow ideas to come to you, and you just allow yourself to riff and to improvise and not worry too much about, does this make sense? Is this clear? And you can form it into that, but you really have to gather all that material first before you can shape it. The shooting, to me, is a very different thing, because you're suddenly involving other people, and you have a schedule and you have a budget. So you can't afford to just play around endlessly. Literally, you can't afford to. So you have to approach things from a different point of view. You have to think in terms of, are we going to be able to do this within the next 2 hours? Because we have to move on to this next thing, because that's going to take this long. And you really have to break something down into its different parts and ask yourself, how difficult are all these parts? How much time will I need? Who will I need to help me? And you also try to cast the movie well, in the sense of casting actors who literally are kind of like writers. I mean, all your writing is dialogue and description, but they're the ones that bring all that infinite detail that a human being brings. And you can never, or nor should you try, I think, to direct all of those little infinitesimal details that a human being brings. You want to cast people who embody the things that you would like to see, and then you let them be themselves through the character. And that's a form of writing as well. It's putting out these details and making them solid, in the sense of they're captured by the camera. They now become yours again. So it's like you send the boomerang out and it comes back to you looking a little different. And that happens in a billion ways when you're shooting. All these little details start to come into the play, into play in ways that you can never really control, but you set the stage for with the writing. What the characters are wearing, what the lighting looks like, what the physical space looks like, even behind the camera, like how much room do you have to maneuver influences how you end up shooting something. So it kind of restricts your options in a way too when you're shooting stuff. So you have to focus on what's possible, not, what's any idea that I could have in my head, or how can I adapt an idea that I did have in my head and make it possible, because we only have a 10 by 10 room and I can't have a 20 by 20 idea in this room. It's just physically not going to happen. Or, how much am I leveraging my knowledge of post-production and animation and visual effects? Because there was a lot of visual effects in this film. So I knew some things, teleportation doesn't exist. So you have to create that. So already you're leveraging some of that in the film. But I didn't know what that was going to look like. So that was kind of a writing stage as well. When you get into post-production, you're rearranging stuff, all these little tidbits that you gathered, you're arranging them and you're giving a size and shape to them. That is another form of writing. I think unlike writing, and this is where the terminology kind of breaks down, because it's all writing, but also it's all not writing. Like when I think of an author in a pure sense, I think of someone writing a novel, and it's just letters and words on a blank page. Yeah. And you could hand it off and go like, there it is. But with film, writing is redefined. Writing is also the way someone holds their hand, and that's captured and then it's put into a computer. And then how long I hold on that shot affects your emotional read on the scene. Like if you're just frozen like that, then you think like, oh, the character's really like thinking. But if I hold on that just for a second, then you think, oh, the character didn't really care too much about that thought. So you can control through timing the way that an audience perceives it, and that's writing to me as well. So that's editing. and what the teleportation looked like, how much visual effects I'm using, how much I'm allowing an audience to see versus how much I want to hide from them. All of that is still continuing to shape stuff, and I'm inspired by the things that actors do as well. Like, I love it when they throw me a curveball and it turns into something different. There was a lot of improvisation when we made this, and I wanted it that way because one thing I've learned about myself is I feed off of external input. I'm not someone that wants all the ideas to come from me, because I run out of gas. I get bored. So the more chances I can have for randomness and other people's ideas to come into the process along the way, the better for me. So then when I get into that editing stage, the final stage of writing in film, you have new elements that are in there that you're considering for the first time. Like, oh, that was a funny line. Where did that come from? How could I put that in there? And so it goes back to, your personal definition of writing. And again, for me, writing is play. At its best, it's playful and improvisational. And I feel like I'm just receiving stuff and then spitting it back out or adding to it. And there's a freshness and a recycling quality to it. And film is particularly well suited to that way of working, I would say, because when you involve other people, that's just naturally a part of it. So to me, that's the fun of those three stages of writing something. You get to see it evolve in those ways.
Cool. I really appreciate you walking us through that one.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that from here we can actually take a look at the end of stage one, which is version 28 of the Hospitality of Neighbors, after which I'm hoping to encourage some folks to go take a look at your work.
Yeah. Commence screen sharing.
Commence screen sharing. And here is version 28.
Yeah, so you can see that it has a title. All of my stuff, when I start writing, I don't even bother to title it anything. I just go like, what's the first thing I can think of? So it was teleporting, but now it has a title. So interior, Will and Natalie's apartment, night. A flash of blue light. Someone emerges in her pajamas on the couch. This is Flora. She looks around, confused. Flora, oh boy. Two people gingerly approach from around the corner, both in pajamas. This is Will and Natalie, both mid-40s. Natalie, what is it? Will, stay back. Flora sees them. Flora, this isn't Troy's apartment. Flora looks around and puts it together. Flora gets up. Will and Natalie get a little worried. Flora explains. Flora, sorry, no, I'm not a burglar. I have this teleporting thing. I just end up in this apartment. Natalie takes off her robe and wraps it around Flora. That sounds terrible. Here, you don't want to catch a chill. Will, my cousin had a teleporting problem. Tore the family apart. Natalie, do you need water? You must be dehydrated. Flora, no, thank you. I should go. I'm sorry to bother you. Natalie, keep the robe. I have 6 just like it. Flora meekly leaves the room, flashing a tiny smile as she exits. Something is on her mind. Interior, Flora's apartment bedroom. Later, Flora enters and slips into bed. Her girlfriend Laura is in bed too. Laura is very sleepy. Laura, hey, did you teleport or did you pee? Flora, teleported. Troy moved out. Laura, he didn't tell you? Flora, yeah, I thought he would have. Laura starts snoring. Flora just thinks. Interior, Will and Natalie's apartment, day. Flora knocks on the door. She has the robe in her hand. The door opens immediately. Will is there, smiling. Will, oh, hey there, Flora. Oh, look at that. You were so kind. Natalie is passing by. Hey, hon, look at it. Look who it is. Flora, I should go. Natalie, oh, hey, Flora. Sees robe. You were so sweet. Why don't you come on in and visit for a bit? Will and Natalie's apartment, day. Angle on, a platter filled with grapes cut in half. Natalie, it's an old family recipe. Will holds an empty wine glass. Will, you know, Natalie used to cut grapes in half with a spoon back when we were first dating. We only owned a spoon back then. The 90s, man. Flora starts to get up and move to the door. Flora, thank you so much for the grapes. I really have to get back. I have a test I'm taking. Natalie. Oh, what for? Flora. The origins of Natalie, and Will stand up. Natalie is sincere with her. Natalie. Flora, before you go, I know you might be embarrassed by it, the teleporting, but believe me, it's not anything we haven't seen before. Will. My cousin had a teleporting problem, tore the family apart. Flora. It's not that, Troy. It's not that. Troy, the person who lived here before, my teleporting into his life kind of caused problems. I just don't want to do that again. I'm sorry to bother you. She lives. Will and Natalie look at each other. Fade to interior Flora's apartment, night. Laura is stapling papers on the couch. Flora is lying on the floor. Laura finishes stapling. Laura. Okay, that's today's stapling. Laura notices Flora staring off into the distance. Laura. What's on your mind? Flora. Am I destined to interrupt people's lives forever? Is that going to be my contribution to society? Laura. What's really going on? The new tenants sound nice. And yeah, Troy moved out without telling you, but that's not your fault. Flora. There's actually more to it. Cue flashback.
Okay. I'm going to cut you off there to encourage folks to check out the full version of The Hospitality of Neighbors.
Yeah.
Where can they actually do that?
So the film is not publicly available yet, though you can watch the trailer on my Vimeo page, just vimeo.com. Darin Quan is the name. So the trailer's up there. We're waiting on festivals before we release it publicly. So that's the best you can do for now.
Yeah, and where can they find some of the other work you do? I know we mentioned some of your cinematography is available on Amazon and iTunes.
Yeah. Well, you can find a lot of stuff on my website, darinquan.com. And also, if you search for those films on Amazon or iTunes, you can watch the movies, rent them, and enjoy them. And that's the best bet to get a dose of my cinematography.
Well, for those interested in One Week Critique, you can find more about our projects at oneweekcritique.com. That's the number one, weekcritique.com. As always, thanks everyone for listening to this interview and watching this interview, depending on how you're approaching it. And Darin, thank you for taking the time out of your day.
Thank you.
Share some things.
Awesome.